Go.
Hi, welcome back to Real Builds, and we're going into our first safety item on the Ford F-150, and that's our rear brakes. Now, we've jacked up the car, put it on a jack stand to make sure it's safe, with the jack supporting it as well, taken off the brake drum just like we did when we were doing our inspection. This point, things change a little bit because now, first we have to get it cleaned up, second, we've got to start replacing these parts. So I'd suggest using your handy dandy camera phone, take some pictures of the mechanism so you know what it's supposed to look like when you're putting it back together. Plus, only do one brake at a time. Don't take them both apart, because if you get confused, you can end up with a mess. This way, we do this one. If we have a problem or we're not sure of something, we can always check the other side. So, first things first, time to clean stuff up using a brake cleaner and a drain pan. Don't let it hit the ground. We live in a world where we need to keep things clean and neat and safe. And notice I've got the brake drum in the drain pan because it needs cleaned up as well. We want to get all the grease and dirt off. And that's why we have some rags to help us along the way. First and foremost, it's so we can see everything properly. Second, it makes life a lot easier when you're doing the job. And lastly, it's much more professional to do it right the first time. There we go. Now, the next step, get out a trusty rag, give things a wipe before the brake cleaner dries. That gets all the grease and old age off the original parts and lets us take a look to make sure our new parts are correct. Now you want to get it clean the same way you get the dishes in your sink clean. You don't want dirty parts going back on. You don't want to work with dirty parts. And you certainly don't want to spill fluids in your work area. That's why we'd use the drain pan, and it's the environmentally smart thing to do. Now see how we've got the brake drum nice and clean? We can see the surface isn't scored or damaged, so we'll give it a quick scuff in a few minutes. But right now, we're going to move on to disassembling the system. You want to stop it? Okay, now we're ready to take things apart. We've got our basic toolkit, no fancy tools, just the tools we showed at the very start of this segment that we're going to be using, and we're ready to tie into it. So first things first, we've got to start getting things off, like these springs. Of course, I haven't done this in a while. Now you got to be careful to get them off, but you also have to be careful not to damage it, because everything we're going to be using from the hardware we'll be reusing. Stop it for a second. Okay. Thanks for coming back to Real Builds. Now it's time to start taking this brake assembly apart. Now you want to have a clean rag handy. You want to lay out the parts as they come off. So rather than fight these springs, we're going to do it another way by starting with the lower retainers, like this one that I've already taken off from here, And as we take our parts off, we lay them out in the order they came. So if you watch, we take a good set of pliers, put our hand behind to hold the pin, push in, twist, and it comes off. And then we lay it out where it came off. So that's the top of the brake. This is the forward retainer. This is the back retainer at the bottom. Now, we just wiggle the pin back a little bit, and it starts to come out for us. Now, that lets the springs get a little looser as we work through. Next, we're going to work on getting the self-adjuster loose. So we pull forward on its piece and screw it in. Now, it's a little hard to see, but the self-adjuster is the mechanism that makes your brakes adjust every time you back up. And it keeps them tight. Well, we don't need tight right now. We need to get the shoes off. So by loosening it off, we make everything a little looser and easier to deal with. There we go. Sometimes a screwdriver needs to give it a little bit of help, especially if it's a set like this that has been together for a long time. And a couple swats gets everything moving. Brake adjusters come in multiple pieces. This is the screw-in part. The ends go onto the brake shoes, and that's why we take our pictures so you can see where they go. I'm going to drop it right in there because it's got to be cleaned up. And that helps loosen everything off so we can now get at these springs and things a lot easier. Just like that. By pulling on it, and now that side comes apart. Now again, as these pieces come out, lay them out exactly how you took it off. So front goes to the front, rear, after we take out the spring, put it at the bottom. The adjuster mechanism goes at the back. The cable that makes it all work is now loose. Now we can get this spring off, and we can take out the spreader bar and place it exactly where it was. Now, a little more squeezing. Now, for the guys out there who have all the special tools, yes, there are special tools to do this, but we want to keep it within the realm of our basic toolkit that we're starting with on this basic build segment. And there we have the rear brake shoe. Now we have to take this clip off in order to get the brake shoe off. And they can be a little tricky. So we swing it around, get everything lined up, give it a couple of good smacks, cuss at it a little bit, and just keep repeating until we get the little monster to come off. Now we want to be careful not to damage anything because these pieces all get reused, unless of course they are damaged, then you have to get a brake hardware kit. So just give us a moment to get this off. And we're going to do a little more cleaning after that, and we'll start comparing parts.
Cut.
Okay, now that we've got all the parts out, carefully laid out, and don't forget to have your workshop manual with you when you're doing this, as well as the pictures you took on your phone. We give it another little clean up. Making sure all the nasty stuff goes into the drain pan. Now we start cleaning up our parts. So we take another rag, in this case an X sock, rub it off. Now a lot of you will want to wear rubber gloves when you're doing this. I don't, because I've been doing it so long that my hands are kind of tough anyway. But you're dealing with chemicals, even though we use environmentally friendly stuff, but it's still something to keep in mind if you don't want your hands looking like mine. Now the springs, and we put them back where they belong in our order so that we know we're grabbing the right part to the right place. See, it really is green, not black. Our spreader bar and its spring.
Oh, sorry, it's a battery pack.
Okay. And we're going to get this spring as well. And just lay everything back out. Now while this dries, we're going to take a short break. You can see how the parts are carefully laid out. Everything's cleaned up. There's nothing on the ground around us. It's all gone into the drain pan and everything's clean and ready. Okay, now it's time to start putting things back together. We've cleaned away our drain pan, cleared the area as much as we can. We have our phone with our pictures ready. We've got our workshop manual. We have our tools. Our old parts are all laid out so that we know exactly how they go back together. And now we're going to take a look at new parts, because before you start taking it apart, you should be checking, and before you go back together, you should check again. Now with brakes, there's a rear shoe, which is called the trailing shoe, and you need to make sure your new shoe matches. And they are a little different because, they are a little different because the trailing shoe has a shorter brake surface than the lead shoe. So in this case, we're good. Everything matches up. That's our new shoe, old one, and we do the same again with the lead shoe. And the lead shoe has a larger braking lining, and we want to make sure everything lines up the same, everything matches up the same before we start. And again, we're in good shape. So we'll take the old ones out of the way and only deal with the new ones now. Now as we get started, we want to take a little bit of grease or a lubricant. I like using the lithium motor assembly grease, and just put a little on the places where the brake slides. So a little bit here, and you can see where they slide. It's a little bit shiny. It's where the shoe actually goes up against the backing plate. And it just makes them work a little bit better. A little bit on the ends here as well. That's your brake cylinder. We're not having to mess with because there's no leaks, runs, or errors. And on our brake adjuster, we put a little at the top, a little on the threads, so it moves nice and easy, and a little in each end. With that, and with all of our parts nicely cleaned up, we're about ready to get back to putting her all together. Okay, let's stop for a second. Okay, now we start putting the pieces back together. So we make sure our pin's all the way forward, grab our correct spring, line it up on the brake cylinder, take our pliers and carefully put it back on. Now these can be a little annoying. You'll want to have another hand, but unfortunately we're only built with two. Lined up. And me, like you, it may take a couple of tries. Stop it for a second. See why?
Cool.
Okay, and with a little twist, we make sure it falls into its slot, which is 90 degrees away from the hole. And that's the first one in place. And now, for the other side. We're just going to repeat the process here, getting the brake shoe up into its proper position and getting the retainer on. So we're going to fight with that a little bit. Well, you've seen how to do the front, now you can do the rear, and here we're going to just deal with it. First step on a rear, getting your handbrake mechanism in place. Which sometimes likes to be a little bit of a struggle. So, and then we take stop it for a minute. Okay,
Go.
we get our emergency brake pieces in place, put it back together with the clips we took off, and they'll want a little help because below it is a spring-loaded clip. So it'll be a bit of a struggle. And always be gentle when you're dealing with this stuff. Yeah, it's a pain, but don't force it. Just wants a little bit of gentle assistance. There we go. Now we can move it up into place. Want to stop it? Okay, now, as we move forward, before we put the spreader bar in, we have to put our track for the adjuster and this spring on, which we'll get a little swearing going here in a minute, but we won't put that on camera. And it'll take a few tries. It always seems to. Now, as you're doing this, make sure you've got this little piece here on to hold the brake shoes back. If you don't, then you'll have to take it all apart and do it again, which nobody likes to do. Keep everything lined up, keep it in place. Keep our piece on to hold everything together. Make sure it all lines up. And stop the camera. Okay, we've got everything in place now. We've got the handbrake connected. We made sure that our cylinder arms are attached right in. So now we need to get the spreader bar in place. So we take our spreader bar that we've cleaned up nicely and get her into the slots she belongs to before we get the springs on. Like so. Now a lot of this stuff is really awkward, so take your time while you're doing it. If you don't, you'll run into trouble, and sometimes you'll get a little frustrated because things don't quite want to line up. You need a lot of hands and a lot of patience when you're working on drum brakes, just because there's so many parts. There we go. Go. Put that in. So, that one in where it belongs. Just keep working it till it all comes together. Stop. Okay, now we've got the brakes reassembled. Make sure it looks like your pictures. Follow the workshop manual. It's extremely important. This isn't like building a kid's playhouse. There can't be any parts left over, and they've all got to be in the right place. So, we've got it all done. We're going to take a piece of sandpaper and clean up the brake shoes because we've had our hands all over them. And we've made a bit of a mess. And contamination on brakes can create all kinds of problems. So just give them a little scuff to clean them up. And we'll move on to the brake drum. Now with the brake drum, we're doing much the same thing. There's no ridge. We know that from when we first looked at it, so we didn't need to get the brakes cut, the brake drum's machine. But we do need to give them a good scuff all the way around to get a nice surface to let the brakes bed back in. So just a scuff so that you can see the lines of the sandpaper. And we're ready to put them back on. Now when we put them back on, we want to use the brake adjuster to adjust the brakes out just far enough so we can barely hear them touching. And then when the rest is done, it'll all fall into place and they'll adjust themselves. Now right now I've got them adjusted too far out. So we'll move them in. You just hold the adjuster out, the actuator out, spin it in, give them a couple of bangs just to get everything to center and settle. And just keep repeating the process till everything fits. There we go. Just like that. Now it's all ready to button back up, put the wheel on, and we'll move to the other side. Some things to remember when you're doing brakes, rear drums, or discs. Once you've got it apart, don't let anyone near the driver's bay. If they step on the brake pedal, you'll have a disaster with brake cylinders or calipers coming apart. We're just doing a reline. We're not changing any of that stuff. There's no brake reading required, but you have to be careful. And if you don't feel confident about doing it, even with the workshop manual, don't do it, have someone else do it. The goal here is so you know what needs done, you have the ability to do it, and you've seen how to do it, but confidence is important and brakes are critical. So if you don't feel comfortable, don't do it, take it to a professional. I'm going to put the wheel and tire back on, and then we'll start on the other side. Talk to you soon.